So, welcome, Rebecca,
Thank you.
to
Nice to
my
see you,
channel.
Adam. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks. So, yeah, I was really excited to connect up with you, and we've had a couple of chats in the past.
Mm.
And I mentioned you on a podcast that I did with Dave Mack about my story of how I became carnivore. And on that, I explained that I'm an architect. And then we connected up, and I was excited to talk to you and have you as my first guest on my YouTube channel because your story is just so amazing. And I'll link your channel below.
Thanks.
And there's just lots I'd like to chat to you about that relates to, the carnivore lifestyle, the dietary side of it, but also the kind of way that you live your life in the sense that it relates to architecture and houses and
Mm.
nature and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I'd love just to, we could talk for hours, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
I've put some points down to you. So I think you've got kind of a reasonable idea, and I can flick to my screen just to remind myself. So perhaps could you just introduce yourself and kind of let people know your story? Obviously, there's lots of stuff they can watch on your channel, but just
Mm.
briefly, just let us know
Cool.
how you got to carnivore.
Okay. So my story, my carnivore story begins back in 2016 when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So at the time I was living in the city. I was living in Manchester in the UK, and I was in the final year of my PhD at Manchester University, and I was like on top of my game, in the thick of it. I was 36 years old at the time. And yeah, I had never really had any health problems in the past. So it was very shocking to suddenly find that the nerve in my eye failed. And so I was left with double vision. And I went through a series of tests to first rule out a brain tumor. And then they did an MRI scan to test for demyelination, which is a hallmark of multiple sclerosis. So what that is the immune system attacking the myelin sheathing in the central nervous system, so in the brain and in the spinal cord, and it leaves lesions or scars. Multiple sclerosis means many scars in Latin, so that's what that comes from. So they did a test for that. They found that there was indeed demyelination, and that's when I first heard, you might have multiple sclerosis. Then they just did tests to figure out what type I had, because there's different types of MS. You can have progressive, you can have secondary progressive, primary progressive, relapsing remitting, or even benign MS, but they can't test for that at the beginning. Anyway, I could go into a lot of detail, but I turned out to have relapsing remitting MS, which was actually good news. It's better than progressive, but the ensuing symptoms completely disabled me. When I say symptoms, in MS, you have episodes of nerve failure, which leave you disabled, which may or may not correct themselves. That's what relapsing remitting is. The body corrects itself over time, although you may be left with residual disability. Progressive, it doesn't do that. You just accumulate disability until whatever may be. On top of those episodes of disability, you have daily symptoms. And very commonly, it's neurological fatigue, balance issues, bladder issues, sensitivity to stress, to heat, to light, things like that, and aches and pains. And I had those symptoms and they were disabling. So I was living, although I'd only had the one episode of nerve failure, I was living for a couple of years with very disabling symptoms of mainly fatigue, but also those previous ones I listed. And I was using a wheelchair, and I was housebound, and my career just hit a brick wall. I was refused welfare by the government. And I also wasn't receiving the support that I would have thought I would have done from those nearest me, because it's very difficult with MS to understand from the outside what's happening, because you can't see it from the outside. Those symptoms are invisible. Unless somebody has a mobility aid, there's very little on the outside to indicate the severity of things. So people had a hard time believing me. And all of those things combined basically brought me to rock bottom. And I also was sort of told, this is the best will ever be. It's degenerative. You're only going to get worse from here on in. And something in me was just like, I don't accept this. I mean, also, you know, you can be in denial about the situation. You know, it's very hard to know why I had that voice inside me, but something in me was guiding me to explore other options, to try and find a way to have a life of any kind. And I also had a discovery, and I think it's this discovery that set me on the road to carnivore in a concrete manner, which was that I discovered that I had an environmental element to the severity of my symptoms. I discovered that by controlling my environment, I could control to some degree the severity of my symptoms. In particular, I discovered, and this is controversial, but very, very real in my body, I discovered that I was sensitive to Wi-Fi and smartphones and that type of radiation. So I was living in Birmingham at the time, big city. And when I discovered this, I realized, I'm not saying it's what caused the condition. I have no idea what caused it. But I learned that if I turn my router off, switch my phone off, I could get a better night's sleep, that I did not have nausea. I did not have sensitivity to light in the way that I used to. And I just went up a level in my wellness. And it was immediate as well. It was like switching a light off. So I was absolutely stunned by that. And that was what got me thinking, maybe there's more to my condition than I am being told. I had at that point stopped taking MS medication because I'd been on a medicine called Copaxone, which you inject every day. And I'd had a really hard time with that, as many people do. And so I just kind of reached the end of my tether with that and stopped taking it. So there was stopping medication, and at the same time, finding something in my environment that I could change that made some of my symptoms go away or improve. And those two discovery, or the decision I made to stop the medication and the discovery that I made, got me thinking, right, I need to be in a better environment. And everything in me needed to be in nature. So, and sunshine. So I decided to move to Spain. And well, Brexit had happened in the same year I got diagnosed, 2016. So I knew I had a deadline. I had to move now or I wouldn't be able to move. And because of the Wi-Fi thing, I was like, and it's got to be up a mountain. That's like the radical element of it. I'm a translator as well. So I knew that if I didn't move to Spain, my Spanish would just die a death. You know, I thought if I do get well enough to work again, I need to keep my Spanish alive. So everything just pointed towards move to Spain now, to the countryside, up a mountain. Even if you're not well enough to do it, you've got to do it anyway. So I did it. And I got there just 2 weeks before the pandemic. Crazy. So I spent the pandemic up a mountain. Couldn't have been in a better location. It was absolutely wild. I mean, it was kind of ironic because I had been in a lockdown in my own body. The fatigue locks you into your body. You know, I was housebound, sofa bound. And not just that, but cognitively, I was extremely debilitated. I could barely string sentences together. My memory was 3 seconds long. When I'd been doing a PhD just a year or so before, you know, it was absolutely unreal. I don't know if our connection just dropped briefly. Hopefully it's okay.
I can still see you. Yeah.
So yeah, I was on the mountain. Pandemic happened. I did see some improvement by changing my environment. And I think that's very interesting for the theme, for the topic of architecture and living conditions on the diet, because I did see some improvement in my condition. I regained some mobility, some stamina, some sort of mental strength from doing that. I was on the mountain for 4 years. And it was on the mountain that I discovered the carnivore diet. So I had followed a diet that was specific to MS before, back in England, because I didn't think that it would actually help me. And it didn't actually help me, but it just made me, it was like a psychological element of control by doing it. And so I followed a near vegan diet, a near vegan whole food diet. So it did include fish. That was the bit that wasn't vegan, but it eliminated all saturated fats, which I find quite ironic now. But yes, it meant that I couldn't have processed vegan food because of the seed oils. They have saturated fats. So it was whole food, and it was, yeah, near vegan, and it didn't make me feel any better. And it was harder to follow in Spain because Spain is not so vegan friendly. And it also doesn't have the wide variety of ingredients that you can get in the UK, like spices and just, international ingredients. It's not as, there's not as much variety. So and also I was living up this mountain. So every time I went to the supermarket, it was exhausting, up and down in the 4x4 and driving to the supermarket. It was just something that became a burden. So I stopped following that diet. And so before I started the carnivore diet, my diet probably couldn't have been much worse. I was basically living on frozen pizzas and treating myself for going to the supermarket with chocolate and God knows what sweet treats. That's my dog in the background. And so, yeah, he always scuttles around on the floor when I'm trying to record videos. So it was a terrible diet, carbohydrate based, fully carbohydrate based. And then I came across the carnivore diet on YouTube. It was Kelly Hogan, and I was struck by her story. And it stuck in my mind, but I didn't act on it. But you know how YouTube, sorry, he's jumping around. Settle down. A tu sitio. He's got hip dysplasia, so he hasn't been on a walk for about a week.
Oh dear.
Yeah. A tu sitio. Kelly Hogan, YouTube. Yeah. So because I had watched that video, YouTube was then suggesting me more carnivore videos. So for about a year, I was getting a drip feed of carnivore videos, and I was clicking on them out of sheer curiosity. And what struck me was that everybody in those videos looked incredibly healthy. And I didn't even think, oh, this could help me with my MS. I didn't even think that. I just thought, oh, I've hit 40. Like, wouldn't it be cool to like be healthier, look healthier? That was a good time to kind of take control of that. And also I realized there was a weight loss element. I wasn't overweight, but I was getting quite bloated with all of the carbohydrates, and I was in a relationship and I just wanted to be my best self, So I just started the diet. It was really just a spontaneous decision, nothing really hinging on it. And I decided to vlog it because I had my channel, but I had about 11 subscribers, and it was just about life on the mountain. So I just decided to vlog it. And that's when my channel started to grow at that point, at the same time that my health started to return. So the whole thing's been captured on video from the beginning. And it was pretty quick in my case. It was pretty quick, the change in my physical and cognitive state. Like amazingly quick, like within a month. And I know other people have said that it hasn't happened that quickly for them. So I'm sure that there's people with maybe more advanced stage of illness. There's different starting points and different bodies, different bodily constitutions. So I couldn't say that it would be the same for everybody. But in my case, within a month, I had noticeable changes, like particularly my core strength had returned. I was able to just get out of bed in the morning and go about my day, which when you haven't been able to do that, when that's been taken from you, that's pretty amazing. It was the energy, it was the strength, it was the cognitive element as well. My memory returned, my weight, I slimmed down, like noticeably. Not that, like I say, no, I wasn't overweight, I wasn't doing it for that reason, but there was it was noticeable, both physically and cognitively, that something radical had happened, noticeable to others. And that's what started my journey. And so I have been carnivore now for actually coming up 2.5 years. And it's been consistent ever since then. So I have had further healing to do because I have a lot of accumulated trauma from the illness, from the impact of the illness on my life and the losses that came about from that. That's been hard. Also, my situation's been hard in Spain. I've moved house a couple of times. The relationship went horribly wrong, stuff like that. So it's been a bit of a battle, but physically I have been, despite the difficulties, my body, my physical health has remained consistent ever since. I have not had symptoms. And in my, in a brain scan, an MRI scan in December last year, I was told that I had no active lesions. So that suggests that the progression of the disease was stopped. Obviously, I would need further information about that, but that's what that suggests. So it's been amazing.
And you're still having checkups.
Yeah, I actually saw my neurologist this week. Actually, a video is about to come out today about that, because I don't really want to go into it, but I will go into it. It will have come out by the time this is published. So I actually had a brain scan in September, which seemed to show new lesions. But that is being compared to my brain scan from before I started the diet, because I moved house twice. So he's not comparing it to my most recent brain scan. He's comparing that to my brain scan from like 2 years ago. So actually, in a nutshell, because it's kind of complicated, but in a nutshell, that progression could have taken place in the time between the previous MRI scan and me starting the diet. And then in 2024, I had a brain scan which showed no active lesions. He hasn't seen that because the other hospital hasn't forwarded him that information. So that's the most up-to-date information. I'm in discussions with my neurologist about filling in the gaps in the year that I moved house, so that he can see a comparison. With MS, it's about the progression. How does your scan compare to the last one? And then the one before that. There's not much you can tell from an isolated scan, except that the lesions were not active. And he can't deny that. That's the information I got from the scan in Galicia, which was an isolated scan, but which showed no active lesions. I don't know if I've explained that clearly. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the no active lesions is
Yeah,
something that is
it's
useful
amazing.
information. Yeah. So at the moment, until my neurologist compares my 2024 scan with my recent 2025 scan, at the moment, as of last year, I was told that I have no active lesions. He didn't say I have active lesions. He just said I have more lesions than in 2022. He didn't say that they're active. So he has to compare the 2024 one to see if I really do have new lesions. He doesn't actually know if those new lesions are from before the diet or after the diet. That's sort of clearest way to explain it. But in 2024, I definitely had no active lesions. And that is what's key, because old lesions are old lesions. They're not a sign of an active disease, a progressing disease. They're the residue of the disease. So that's what the scans are picking up. But to me, I actually don't think it matters that much, because the lesions in themselves are not an indicator of your disease, your level of disability, for example. They don't correspond directly to whether you have relapses or not of disability. You can have a whole load of lesions and be quite well, and then you can have like one lesion in a particularly difficult, sensitive area and be very disabled. What matters to me is the symptoms, and I have not had any. And he tells me I'm an enigma. He said this to me this week. I went on Monday to my appointment with him. He's like, "You're an enigma." And I'm like, well, I have got an explanation for this if you're willing to listen. He's not willing to listen, goes against his training, but he's like, he can't explain it. He's like, "You're an enigma." He said, "You're a happy enigma, though." He was quite emphatic. "You're a happy enigma. I'm happy you don't have symptoms, but I can't explain it." He said, "I talk about you at conferences. I can't explain it. You're not on medication. You're not listening to me at all. You're not following my advice, and you're absolutely fine. And I can't explain it."
It's amazing, isn't it? The way I've seen so many of your videos, and it's so clearly documented, as you say, going right back to the very beginning. I've seen your interview, your meeting, your online chat with a lady from America. I can't remember her name now.
Diane.
Who also had a similar story, Diane, with MS as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, it just captured my attention, so clearly. And yeah, I kind of want to just delve in a bit more to. You talked about initially before you started the carnivore diet that you saw some benefit, that you when you switched your router off and your Wi-Fi, and you were talking about how that's controversial. So I'm wondering whether you can kind of quantify, how much do you think the carnivore diet, change in diet and lifestyle or food that you're eating? How much is that? Can you quantify the two? What do you think has been the biggest benefit?
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. Obviously, I can't quantify it. It's a subjective experience. I can't give someone else a numerical scale of what it is. But what I can describe it as is that when I discovered about the Wi-Fi, it felt like a reduction in my symptoms. The volume was turned down, not all the way to zero, but just enough so that I could function enough to be able to move countries. It gave me an element of functionality, but I was still very, very limited, actually. I was limited both cognitively and physically because I lacked strength cognitively and physically. That didn't return to me. It was more just like the noise of my symptoms, the nausea, I couldn't look at lights, I couldn't get a good night's sleep, stuff like that was turned down, and I was just given an element of like an air pocket within it all, So there was a definite and consistent difference, which I experienced, but I still felt like I have MS. With Carnivore, it wasn't so much a reduction in symptoms, it was the return of my strength. Does that make sense? It was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be able to get up in the morning and go about my day. This is what it feels like to be able to move a log pile and not have a serious consequence afterwards. This is what it feels like to be able to go out and socialize because I've got the strength and I can hold a conversation and I can drive it late at night and not be exhausted. Like when I was really ill, I was on my hands and knees in the shower and I'd have to rest for an hour after I'd had a shower. That was very real. Like that was the way my life was every single day, hands and knees in the shower for no obvious reason, just because my body was not functioning. And that lasted for a couple of years. And when I discovered about the Wi-Fi, it was like, just turn down a notch, but Carnivore returned the strength. So I think both things are important. I think diet is possibly the most important. I mean, I have no idea because I didn't do it in that order. What would it have been like if I'd started Carnivore first and then discovered that my environment would I have experienced a difference in my environment? Because actually now that I feel fully healthy again, and now I can tolerate Wi-Fi and phones much better. I still wouldn't live in the city because of what I've experienced, and I didn't like the city environment anymore. But so I feel like I can thrive in a natural environment more than in the city. But I definitely can tolerate what I was unable to tolerate before. So I do wonder what would have happened, what would have been my story if I'd started Carnivore much sooner. But it didn't happen that way. It was the environment that I changed first, and that did make a difference. So I can't easily quantify it, but I can say that I still consider it important. Diet probably like the first core step to take. Secondly, think about environment, in terms of impact. I think I'd put diet first over environment for the impact, but it happened to me the other way around. And it was in this natural environment that I found Carnivore. And maybe that cleared the way for it to be such a quick return of my health. Maybe because the environment was correct, the Carnivore diet worked better and quicker. I don't know. But they're both important. Like, to me, one isn't complete without the other.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to hear you speak about it. I've heard you so many times on your channel. I've heard people say, whatever is the correct thing to do for people who are ill is the correct thing to do for everybody.
Yeah.
And that includes what we should eat. And, intuitively, when you're talking about how the environment, being in the mountains, fresh air, sunlight, contact with nature. I grew up in the Lake District, and I used to go camping, climbing, and I know that whenever I've come back from any of those types of trips, I feel healthier. I feel physically different, more relaxed. If I've ever gone up, I live in Scotland now, in Edinburgh. And over the years, in Britain at least, our opportunities to get that contact with nature seems to be becoming more difficult. I mean, lots of the places are national park. You can't camp unless you go to specific campsites. You're not allowed campfires anymore in lots of campsites, and it feels like we're being cut off from nature. And so when you talk about, your move to Spain, it really resonates with me. You just know it to be beneficial. It's hard, like you say, it's hard to quantify it. But, and, I mentioned to you, my thoughts on, because I'm carnivore now and I have been for a year and 6 months. I realized I was just counting up the months the other day. And so I have, benefits that I can feel. I'm living in a city in Edinburgh, which is quite a green city. We're quite close to the mountains. Hop in a car and I go for walks with the kids. But, I'm living in a city and I'm reliant on buying all my food from supermarkets and, local butchers. So I don't have that direct connection to nature like you do, and where you're a little bit more remote. But it just got me thinking about, that as an architect, designing houses, once you go on the carnivore diet, you realize that you don't need plants and you don't need rice and carbohydrates. It did for me at least, I'm sure it has for you, changed your whole outlook to how we produce our food, wherever we may be. When you look at our landscape, it's so much of our landscape is monocrop farming.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I did a housing project in a woodland, and I had a really lovely guy who helped me. We designed a forest garden as part of our landscape scheme. Graham Bell. He's sadly not with us anymore.
I think I've heard of him.
He was an expert.
Oh, is that the
forest
telephone?
gardening.
Sorry, telephone guy. No, it's not Alexander Graham Bell.
No, it's not a telephone guy. Yeah.
I was like, I think I've heard of him.
No, he had a. No, you wouldn't. No, yeah, Alexander Graham Bell. You're thinking of. No, this was a different Graham, and he had with his wife Nancy, the oldest established forest garden in Britain. And it's not open anymore, but it was a way of producing edible crops in a very small space, a bit like agroforestry, whereby you don't use pesticides, and just the process by which you grow and the kind of structure that you have on the garden, is all about multi-layered, growing things really densely, and a wide variety of plants. But that and agroforestry, it's more of a kind of complex system of growing. But he proudly used to say that he grew more in terms of yield. He had more yield in tons, 1.25 tons one year, he said, which outperformed the local farmer, who was a farmer of many more acres. And at the time, I thought, this is amazing. We could be growing our plants in our gardens. We could, it's very, forest garden is very like if you have a scale between, if you imagine a scale between wilderness and monocrop farm. A monocrop farm is hugely intensive in terms of the energy that you need and all the pesticides you need, and equipment, tractors and all this kind of thing, hugely energy intensive. And then on the other end of the scale is you do nothing to the land and it just grows, like a forest.
Yeah.
And so forest gardening is very close to the forest side. It's quite low energy, really. But it's more of a complex procedure to actually harvest, because you've got lots of different types of produce. And so you can't use these very efficient kind of big tractors and big vehicles. It's more of a complex way of harvesting the crops. So at the time, I was really interested in that. And I think for those people who don't want to do carnivore, it's still, a brilliant way to grow food that feels much more sustainable, and it increases biodiversity because you've got lots of different types. Or, animals are still key to that kind of way of producing food. And so, but then when I found carnivore, I discovered the NEP estate, which I talk about in my chat with Dave Mack, an example of regenerative farming, where they leave their longhorn cows and Tamworth pigs and wild ponies to roam freely on their land. And there's a brilliant documentary called Wilding, and a book called Wilding by Isabella Tree, where she talks about that, her and her husband Charlie. And so after a year probably on carnivore, I realised, wow, our landscape could be just like it is at NEP. And actually, we don't even need plants or carbohydrates, grains, rice, pasta, all the things that I used to actually
Yeah.
or absolutely binge on
Yeah.
before I changed my lifestyle. So I've started thinking, and I was talking to you about just trying to rethink how our landscape could be if more people adopted the diet that we now subscribe to. And have felt the benefits myself through transitioning and being a year and a half on carnivore. So, and I'm eager to kind of link it back though to architecture and say, right, this is one thing that could change our landscape. And I've been keenly looking at other people who are talking in the metabolic health kind of space, talk about exposure to sunlight, about grounding,
Yeah.
and we all know that connection to nature is so important.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you some other questions that perhaps you hadn't talked about so much on your
Okay.
channel, because lots of people talk about metabolic health, and there
Yeah.
seems to be over and over, people are discussing, is carnivore healthy or not? And then you've got the two polar opposite, sides on
Yeah.
YouTube. And I was keen to talk to you to try and kind of move, because I'm absolutely sold on the carnivore diet now. I can't imagine going back because of my own benefits that I've felt. But I'm kind of keen to move the conversation into another space where we just talk about, it's not just, is it good or not? I think we both feel that it is.
Yeah.
So if more people did the carnivore, how could our landscape change? So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you live, how much more sunlight exposure are you getting? What kind of, I mentioned to you when we chatted offline, there's a lady called Dr. Alexis Cowan who I watched on a great podcast with Jesse Chappas. And she talks about sunlight exposure, and there's another lady really good, Dr. Sarah Pugh. She talks about grounding. So yeah, how do you what's a typical day look like for you? Because I know you've got animals as well now, so you're out more in the outside world. Have you come across these terms of grounding or
Yeah.
sunlight exposure? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
Dr. Cowan talks about getting the sunlight in the eyes in the morning and how
In the morning.
that
Yeah.
helps our bodies to
Is it
seek the sun.
infrared in the morning?
Yeah, vitamin D.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. It's a
And
big,
so,
one of the
in that context,
reasons.
I'm thinking about,
Sorry,
sorry,
we
there
have a
was a bit of
delay.
delay on this line,
Yeah.
so hopefully it comes out. Yeah, yeah. So I was thinking in the context of when we're designing new houses, I'm now thinking about, can the house that I'm designing, does it allow for, easy contact with the ground, good sunlight, where you can open a window and you can get direct sunlight on your face, and perhaps even be fully naked and kind of still private, not being overlooked with neighbours like I am in
Yeah.
my tenement.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I'll let you carry on about how you're living at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I'm currently, what I did is I moved house. I moved away from the mountain cabin. And actually, I deeply regret doing that. I couldn't miss it more. And I couldn't regret having left it more. It's with me every day. I had exactly what you're describing up that mountain. And the only reason I left was because of relationship issues. And I've kind of moved back to civilization a little bit. And I thought, oh, now I've got my health back. Not to go into, I will come round to answering specifically your question about, architecture and lifestyle. But like, I've tried coming back to civilization just a little bit. And I don't want to. I've discovered by doing that I was happier on the mountain. It was great. Like, I felt so good up there for all of those reasons, for being able to step outside barefoot in the sunshine. I had spring water, things that you haven't mentioned that are important to my lifestyle now, which I don't have at the moment, but hope to get back to having, are spring water, stone built house, things like that, like details like having a stone built house means that you are much warmer in the winter when you've got the fire on and much cooler in the summer when there's a heat wave because it's it's wonderful. And it's just something so satisfying about a stone built house. So that's kind of like on my top of my wish list. And spring water, because they add so much crap to the water system in cities and towns. So I don't like that. The fluoride, things like that. Fluoride might have its place if you apply it topically to your teeth to help with against tooth decay, but you should not be ingesting it. It's a chemical like byproduct that we shouldn't be ingesting, and it's in our water. So spring water that comes from within the mountain, you know, that kind of stuff. And yeah, I do get more sunlight exposure in Spain, and particularly because of my animals, they get me outside. I actually quite like, by nature, I'm quite an indoor person because I'm a writer. I could spend all day inside on my computer. But I think, you know, getting away from a screen and getting out into the sunshine is the best things that you can do for yourself, for your health, for your body and your mind. Yeah, I have currently, the animals that I have are 3 dogs, 2 cats, 5 chickens. I used to have 10, but I'm down to 5, 1 rooster and 4 geese. I now have 4 geese that I've accidentally adopted from somebody. And I love that. They are the things that make me feel like I have a purpose, and like, yeah, they get me outside. You know, I walk the dogs. I need to change the goose's water twice a day, you know, and there's so many topics I want to bring up, because the other thing I want to go in the direction of my future plan, what I'm trying to do is get back onto a mountain. I'm in a bit of a legal mess in the house that I tried to buy, but it's fine because I don't want to live in it anyway, because I don't want to go back to civilization. I want to go back up a mountain. So I'm currently investigating ways that I can return to a mountain cabin and get sheep. This is really important to me, to be able to get sheep for the carnivore lifestyle so that I can raise my own and make it more economical, but also I know how they've lived their lives. I know what's gone into them. There's also the joy of doing that process yourself and being self-sufficient. And I want to breed chickens. At the moment, I do have a rooster, but my chickens are not breeding chickens. They are egg-laying chickens, so they don't sit on eggs. So I'm actually in talks with somebody to locate a couple of different chickens of a different breed so that I can then have chickens for meat. This will be my first foray into raising my own animals for meat. I'm an animal lover, so I find that hard to swallow, funny phrase to use, but I understand that if I'm eating meat, then I'm participating in that process. So why not oversee that process? And it kind of makes me respect animals more. Well, it really does make me respect animals more. I could go into the kind of spiritual dimension of that. But I think what I want to do is talk about the fact that it is becoming harder to live that life. This is what's going on. The way I live my life right now is being currently impacted by rules and regulations in a way that I find quite worrying. The landscape's here for the taking. You know, I'm in this wonderful landscape with a lovely climate that is, I would say, probably the ideal climate, because you have 4 seasons. You do have rainfall. The temperatures aren't, you know, it's too hot down south. It's in Spain. It's too dry. People are moving to the north of Spain in their droves because it's not livable down south. It's too hot, too dry. Asturias, where I am, is this wonderful. It's warmer than the UK. Longer hours of sunlight. The growing season is longer, and so you do get more sunlight, but you also get what you need, which is rainfall. That's a really important part of an off-grid life, is having enough rainfall to grow. So it's got that nice balance. So, and the landscape's wonderful and you can live up a mountain, but it's the EU and it's Spain and it's 2025 and crazy stuff is going on that is making it very, very hard to live self-sufficiently. So recently, all chickens in Spain were put on lockdown. You can't let your chickens outside. Also, you have to register your chickens. Now, I went to a farm shop today to buy some food for the geese, and I got talking to the guy. He's the one who's going to find me a couple of chickens that are of a different breed so that I can start breeding chickens. And I was talking to him about the regulations. I was like, look, what do you think about this lockdown? What do you think about the whole thing? And he was very skeptical. You have to talk carefully about these things to find out what people really think about them. You know, you can't just go in and say, I think it's all a hoax. You know, I'm not saying I always I always sort of hold back my truest opinions, especially online. And I'm quite careful about it because I might be wrong. I don't know. Who knows? None of us really know what's going on. But he said that he sees a lot of inconsistencies, a lack of coherence in a lot of the rules and regulations that are being implemented top down from the EU, but also Spain's just very bureaucratic anyway. And it's just a bit of a coincidence that suddenly we had to register chickens. Like, you now have to fill in a form to say that you're keeping backyard chickens. And that form has to include like land registry information, a picture of the coop. You know, I haven't been able to fill in the form. It's too complicated. I need help filling in the form to let them know that I've got 5 chickens. And now there's a lockdown and they know exactly where all the chickens are because they're all registered. And it's like, that's a bit worrying.
Yeah.
Like, why do you need that? Okay, where's this leading? You know, it's like, are you going to come and police this now that you know where all the chickens are? And also, how are you going to police this? What's going to happen to the chickens? You know, because is it too far-fetched to think that maybe this avian flu might lead to a cull of all the chickens, which are now registered? I don't know. I feel like, though, the events of the past 5 years mean that nothing is too far-fetched. Everything's on the table. That's what I truly think. And that worries me. And it's the same. He was saying it's the same with cows. Suddenly there's all these conditions, blue tongue and this and that. And the thing is, assuming they're real, it's not unreasonable to imagine that you... I don't know because I don't have these animals yet, but I've heard of it in the context of sheep, but he mentioned it in the context of cows. So it's just a disease, a cow or a sheep disease, blue tongue. That's all I can say. I don't know. You'd have to look it up. But it's like there are lots of regulations to do with mitigating against diseases in cattle. Now, I'm not saying that that's unreasonable. I'm just saying that the point to which it's regulated is making it harder and harder to live self-sufficiently. And that is worrying. And this avian flu, I don't know. I don't know. I find it very, like, this morning I was battling with I've made an area outside for my chickens so that they can go outside because I've got like a netted area just next to their coop. So I've made like a kind of makeshift fencing corridor so that they are directed into that covered area. So that should be okay. They should be allowed to spend some time outside in that area. But I'm battling every day with this fencing because it keeps falling down because it's not properly secured. And every time I'm doing it, I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. I just want my chickens to be outside, you know, and when they escape, I'm chasing after them. I'm like, you guys are breaking the law. You're criminals right now. You're going to get me in trouble, you know, and it's like, is this a joke? 5 chickens, you know, is this really? And I do believe, and I don't know, it's hard to bring up without people labeling you as being a conspiracy theorist. But I just don't like the element of control. I feel like we're being funneled back into the cities to live, you know, very artificial lives away from nature. It's harder and harder. I've learned that by moving out into the countryside. I've learned that it's actually really complicated to live in the countryside these days. And it's worrying because that to me should be a fundamental right of a human.
Yeah, I agree. And it's sad to hear. I follow a farmer online as a YouTube channel and there's a few that talk about the Bovaer. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's something that they're in Holland, I think, or maybe it was Denmark. They're being forced to give the cows Bovaer, and it's something that reduces the methane that the cows produce.
Come on.
So it's like a it sounds absolutely bizarre. And you know what they're explaining is that their cows are getting sick as a result, and that they're obviously really angry about it.
Yeah.
I mean, so that kind of runs in line with what you were just saying, and it's really sad to hear because, you know, as you say, it's kind of a fundamental right surely, to be able to have, livestock and be able to feed your family, have a house. These are kind of fundamental basic rights. Have good access to good water, all these kinds of things, and sunlight, things that would help us be metabolically healthy. And yeah, I think you're right about the city side of it. I'm lucky, as I say, in Edinburgh is pretty good, I would say. But I've also lived in Birmingham, so I know,
Oh, have you?
I
Oh,
know
yeah, I think you
Birmingham
said.
very well. Yeah,
Good old
yeah,
bear.
for 3 or 4 years. And so I've lived all over England, and it does feel like we're being more and more cut off from our natural environment.
Yeah.
So, this idea that we can perhaps start to let nature back into our cities, but on the flip side also think about how we might build better in the rural areas, with wild animals roaming. It's kind of something that Charlie mentioned in the Wilding documentary about his vision, of having a north-south kind of wild corridor where animals can roam. And, bearing in mind that with the carnivore diet, I get my beef from Knepp. One of the places I get my beef from is Knepp. So I know it's regeneratively farmed. It's as healthy. The cows are as healthy as they can be, and they've lived their most natural life as much as possible nowadays, at least. They're not grain fed. They're not kept in a warehouse. So I mean, so it's sad to hear, that these kinds of restrictions are being put on animals, as small as chickens, or
Yeah.
hens rather. But I think, hopefully by buying my meat from regenerative farms, we're kind of helping fight just by our choices, consumer choice, helping to encourage that kind of, more of those kinds of businesses.
Yeah.
So what's it like around where you live? Do you have contact with farmers? As one thing I wrote down as something I'm interested in. And actually I went partnered up with one of my friends who's an architect. He was invited and asked me to kind of partner up with him to tender for a new village project, which I was really, really excited about. Because I saw it as an opportunity to kind of explore this idea of housing, in a village kind of context, a new village community. And, the brief was really aspirational. They wanted it to grow all their own food, produce their own energy, have their own water, retain all their water that they use, so they minimized any runoff. It sounded like an absolutely ideal project for me to get stuck into. And, I pulled in a couple of really top experts in their field with regard to forest gardening. So there was Thomas Remiers, and I spoke to a farmer called Harvey, who I'm still in contact with. Who else did we have? We had a guy called Jay who deals with water management. The idea was to get a team that could all come together with our own expertise. Andy does kind of community projects. So he gets communities together, he helps them link up with landowners, and then they commit to purchasing the land pending planning approvals. I'm hoping to do an interview with him as well, actually, to talk about this more broadly. And that was I just thought it was a brilliant opportunity to kind of experiment with the idea of new housing in a rural context with perhaps free roaming animals. So yeah, and I've been thinking and chatting with Andy about trying to explore these ideas of communities linking with farmers, with the idea of wilded landscapes, free roaming animals, and housing in a rural context. So I was interested in your experience with you. Do you have local farmers? Is it easy to buy your produce from them? And or do neighbours perhaps have animals themselves? And have you thought of lots of questions here? Have you thought of any kind of joint ventures with them in terms of maybe purchasing some animals, and then sharing, the ownership of them on some shared land or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, all of those things. There are obviously, it's a farming area. So I have made connections with farmers. When I lived up the mountain, I lived right next door to people who kept their own cows that grazed them on the mountain. So I was in talks with them about maybe buying half a cow. But even that comes with bureaucracy. You can't just buy a cow. You have to like declare that you've bought a cow, and you have to get it slaughtered at a slaughterhouse, and it's paperwork. Like nothing is as free as you would like it to be in Spain, at least. Everything's complicated. Sorry to like be so negative about it. It's a hard country to live in, honestly. But the people, they are the saving grace. Like the farmers themselves don't agree with this, and so you can at least have a whinge with the farmers about all of the bureaucracy. And I do know people who have land for sheep, and so they're not farmers, but they're people living an off-grid lifestyle. Friends of mine, and I know a few people actually who have land, and lots of people like to have sheep because even if not for consumption, but because they keep the grass down. So I've spoken to maybe 4 or 5 people about the possibility of, because I haven't got land for sheep at the moment, of having sheep on their land or joining in with their herd, or approach. It's quite easy to find out who to approach. Oh, that field's got sheep in it. Ask somebody who owns that field, who keeps those sheep, and approach them. You're like, yes, that's a way that you can. There's lots of ways to kind of collaborate, and farmers all over the place. So like the guy in the farming shop I just mentioned earlier, who I was talking with about the chicken restrictions. So I don't think he's a farmer, but he owns a farming shop. And so he knows all the farmers. They all come to him. There's only one in my town. There's farming shops around and about everywhere, but there's only one in my closest town. So he knows all the farmers. Yeah, there's a network of people, most of whom are similarly wishing that life could be more straightforward in terms of self-sufficiency, and actively finding ways to make life more self-sufficient the way it used to be. There's a lot of nostalgia about how it used to be. There's an old lady with a Zimmer frame. When I walk the dogs, I walk down into the village closest to me, and there's an old lady with a Zimmer frame who's usually out walking around the car park, and we often stop and have a chat. And we normally just talk about the weather, But the other day, I talked to her about the fact that I used to have MS and be in a wheelchair. Like, it just came up in conversation, and she was really shocked. I mean, she's just about compos mentis, she's just about, she's very old. She's a very old lady. But you can just about have a conversation with her. And so she was visibly taken back, used to be in a wheelchair. And then we were talking about the fact that these days, so many people seem to be getting sick, and a lot younger. And she said, there's so many people in this village who have passed away or are sick. And I didn't, she's an old lady. I don't want to go into like anything too heavy with her. But I said, maybe it's because of the food that we eat that's so wrapped in plastic. And she said yes, when she grew up, they had eggs from their chickens and milk directly from the cows, and it all used to be like this way of life. And she looked so like nostalgic when she was talking about it. It really struck me that it's not just about where we live, it's about the times in which we live, and the systems that we are living within that are really quite unhealthy for us. They're not geared towards our well-being and our health and our longevity. Why that is, I don't know. That's where it goes into conspiratorial territory that I don't want to go into. But it is the case that your default as a human being in this world is an unhealthy life. In front of a screen, processed food in a city. And that might be fine for some people. But I think that there is a way of life which helps us to unlock our potential as a species, and that's being suffocated. And maybe there are ways to
definitely
open that up again. Maybe there are ways to fight for that. Maybe there are choices we can make still. which, with the carnivore diet as a way into that, but it's so much broader than just the diet. It's a whole lifestyle and an ethos.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for an hour now, actually. It's just whizzed by. So I don't know how much time you've got, or whether we can schedule another chat, but
Yeah,
it's perhaps this is a good place to finish for now, do you think?
sure. Yeah, no, another chat would be great. Whenever. Yeah, it's great to talk to you.
Great. Well, I mean, it sounds like what you're doing is working, and I'm just fascinated by your story of, the transformation that you've had. And, I think, yeah, I just encourage everyone to kind of just do what we're talking about, really. She was just try and get back to a basic way of living. I'm now certified as a carnivore coach. And so I've learned quite a lot about how we metabolize food, which is why I'm so hard and fast decided that the carnivore is a good way to live. It makes so much sense, when you take it back to core principles, when you think how we evolved as a species and how agriculture is actually a very recent, change in our evolutionary history.
Yeah.
And how intuitively, or how I've felt being in contact with nature. They were my best days. When I think about if ever I've been stressed, and I could link it back to just perhaps just not being out enough in the or just work overtake
Yeah.
and now the diet side of it, and I'm keen to kind of rediscover what's just the best way to live. And I think food is so important in the sense that it shapes our everything. It shapes our towns, cities. And over the lockdown, I remember just how vulnerable I felt when we couldn't get particular types of food like flour, for example.
Yeah.
I wasn't carnivore then,
Yeah.
and I remember walking into the shop and there was no flour on the shelves. I don't know if you remember that. And you thought, crikey, where am I going to get? Because if you've got kids, it's
Yeah.
very much in your forefront of your mind. What
Yeah.
happens if we can't? What happens if if actually there's no food?
Yeah.
And that really sharpened my thinking about
Yeah.
being self-sustainable. And I still live in Edinburgh. As an architect, it kind of feels like an appropriate place to be. But yeah, I'm really, really starting to think again about what do I want longer term.
Yeah.
Ideally, you'd want to be a place where you're not reliant on the
Yeah.
systems that
Yeah.
are destined to fail.
Yeah.
So perhaps we'll leave it there for now. And yeah, I'd love to chat to you again another time. Maybe
I'd like
we'll
to
try
put
and
out
I'll
there.
reflect on what we've talked about today.
Sorry, we have got a small delay, haven't we? But I just want to put out there that I'm I'm quite I've had this idea of maybe once I'm back up a mountain, I'm doing everything I can to get back up a mountain. Wouldn't it be lovely to have some kind of carnivore conference to talk about all of these topics in Spain up the mountain? I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'd love to go. Yeah, it sounds amazing. I mean, and I think it would be great to just trying to move the conversation on from just this polarized kind of world of is carnivore healthy or not. Let's try and move the conversation on to, how can a carnivore world, what might it look like, and
Yeah,
how can we change the way that we live to support it, to give people more options.
yeah, yeah.
So that. All right. Well, thanks ever so much
Thank
for coming
you.
on, and
Thank you.
yeah, it's been a privilege to have you as my first guest, and I look forward to our next chat.
Oh, it's an honor to be your first guest. Yeah, and I also look forward to our next chat. It's super interesting topics. I love the idea of moving the conversation onwards beyond this kind of, this, is it good, is it not, is it healthy, is it not, to how can we live, how can we best live as carnivores. I love that. How can we change society?